Former Prime Minister Helen Clark won't deny having signed off on embassy break-ins while she was in power between 1999 and 2008. And in an interview for The Service, a new RNZ podcast about the role of the SIS in the Cold War, she says the raid by the SIS and MI6 to try to steal the Warsaw Pact codes from the safe of the Czech Embassy in Wellington was justified. RNZ investigative journalist Guyon Espiner worked with Wellington writer and documentary maker John Daniell to produce the podcast. Guyon Espiner has the story.
The podcast series, The Service, reveals that the SIS teamed up with MI6 to break into the Czech Embassy in Wellington in 1986. Their target was an embassy safe containing Warsaw Pact codebooks, which would have allowed them to decrypt communications between the Soviet-aligned countries behind the Iron Curtain. That break-in was one of multiple raids on buildings housing foreign embassies in Wellington, carried out by the SIS in breach of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Helen Clark told the podcast that despite being a stickler for international law and working right at the top of the United Nations, she believed the raid on the Czech Embassy was justified.
Well, it might seem strange coming from me, but I think it probably was.
She said that given the serious prospect of nuclear war in the mid-1980s, breaking the codes of the Soviet bloc communist countries and gaining insights into their thinking would have been immensely valuable. Helen Clark believed that David Lange, Labour leader and Prime Minister at the time, would have been justified in approving the raid on those grounds.
I would think that it was probably wheeled up to a Prime Minister in that context, that something very useful could possibly be found, and he said, well, give it a go. That's my judgment.
Helen Clark also refused to say whether the SIS broke into foreign embassies during her time as Prime Minister, from 1999 to 2008, when she was also Minister in charge of the intelligence agencies. Were you ever asked as Prime Minister to sign off on a break into a foreign embassy in New Zealand?
I couldn't comment on that.
That's still something that must stay secret?
Couldn't comment.
That sounds like a yes.
Well, isn't it neither confirm nor deny?
So it still happens, broadly, does it?
Who knows? Who knows?
Gerald Hensley was the head of the Prime Minister's department under David Lange at the time of the Czech Embassy raid. He says the SIS practice of breaking into foreign embassies stopped when officials became fearful of the potential international fallout.
My recollection is that we got increasingly nervous. When I say we, I mean the non-intelligence side of the political repercussions of a failure or something going badly wrong. My recollection, such as it is now, was that we were fairly keen to abandon it after a few turned up, nothing of any particular use. The risk we felt outweighed the chance of a return.
The story of the Czech Embassy raid has been brought to light by Wellington writer and documentary maker John Daniell, whose mother and stepfather both worked for the SIS. John Daniell says his late stepfather, who went by the pseudonym Jim Stewart, told him about his involvement in the raid before his death in 2005. Jim Stewart, who specialised in detecting and planting bugs, said the SIS did get the codebooks from the Czech Embassy. But both Gerald Hensley and also the head of the operation from the New Zealand end, an SIS officer who cannot be named, says when the SIS raided the embassy, they came away empty-handed. The truth behind the success or failure of the mission remains a mystery because the SIS is refusing to comment on the raid at all, citing national security grounds. Security analyst Paul Buchanan says obtaining the codebooks would have been a phenomenal prize, even if they only allowed temporary decryption of the Warsaw Pact communications. He says that while breaking into a foreign embassy is a breach of international law, the worlds of diplomacy and intelligence are quite different.
You know, many people think in the world of diplomacy that things are black and things are white, but intelligence services operate in the gray. And so, although the Vienna Convention is written in black and white terms, I don't think any intelligence agency that has an opportunity like this presented before it would refuse to take that opportunity, particularly given the stakes involved.
You can listen to the podcast and read more about the series at rnz.co.nz/The Service. For Checkpoint, ko Guyon Espiner tēnei.